concern you about the unknown and the unidentified flying object?
Oh, yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military, and they never were able to make me a concrete report on.
Do you have anything on the subject, sir?
No, I haven't had anything on the subject, and there's always things like that going on. The flying saucers, and we've had other things, you know.
For years, the world has seen reality distorted, facts manipulated, and truth hidden. But there's even more to the story than anyone has ever suspected, because no one has been able to see the whole picture. Until now.
G'day and welcome back to another episode of the Unexplained Rundown. I am your host, Grant Lavac, and if you found this channel intentionally, then like me, you're intrigued by the unexplained mysteries of this mortal coil of ours, and you crave to know what's real and what's not. So I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day, your evening, your graveyard shift to make this your video and content of choice. No matter where you are on this blue marble of ours, I appreciate you watching this content. It's been an interesting week over the last really almost 2 weeks, week and a half. The world and this community has been waiting with bated breath for ODNI's updated report on UAP. So hopefully that lands any day now, and we can kind of get a sense as to what's been going on this topic since the public congressional hearings back in May of this year. It's also been a very interesting week down under in Australia because this time of year, each year, there is what is called the Senate estimates. They're budget estimates hearings that the government and various committees and portfolios of government undertake to ensure that they're spending taxpayer dollars wisely. They're not wasting it on programs that are not going to produce a significant return on investment, those sorts of things. So it's been a very interesting week. And for context, for those of you that are really not up to snuff or well-versed on what's been going on in Australia as it pertains to the UAP topic, let me take you back a bit and give you some context. So on the 27th of October of last year, 2021, at the then Senate estimates hearing, the Senator for Tasmania, Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, the only senator then and to date that has had the courage and gumption to raise the issue of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, in an Australian context. And he took his full allocated time at that hearing in October of last year to press the then Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Mel Hupfield, on what he knew about UAP. And more importantly, well, what is Australia doing about UAPs? Because ever since the release of ODNI's preliminary assessment on UAP on the 25th of June of last year, our US ally and Five Eyes partner has been taking this topic very seriously. So what's Australia doing about it? And it was quite an interesting exchange. So let me play that exchange for you just to provide a bit of context going into today's update.
Relate to release of the report on the 25th of June 2021 by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Preliminary Assessments, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. This is an issue that has been raised in Congress. The Department of Defence has submitted a report. It's become a significant matter of public interest. And I suppose my first question is, are you aware of that report, Chief of Air Force?
I'm not formally aware of the report, but if I'm thinking there was an article in the newspapers, a commentary about that at some stage, but I'm not quite sure of the content of the report.
Okay. Just as a matter of interest, what questions did you think I was going to ask?
I thought you were going to ask some questions about aircraft, but it sounds like you're going to ask questions about UFOs.
Well, We'd be very interesting to hear your views on this. Look, yes, it has been reported in the media extensively, both here and internationally.
Now you can see how visibly uncomfortable the Air Marshal Mel Hupfield was back then. I think he was caught completely off guard and had absolutely no idea that he was going to get thrown a bunch of questions on UAP. So why is the topic of UAP still being asked today? This time 1 year later. Well, following that Senate estimates hearing in October of last year, the responses that the Royal Australian Air Force and Australian Department of Defence provided and submitted to Senator Whish-Wilson's office on following a number of additional questions on notice that he had submitted, he wasn't really satisfied with the responses that he received. So in summary, the Royal Australian Air Force and Australian Department of Defence is doing absolutely nothing and has absolutely no interest on the UAP topic. And that's a big concern. And it's a big quandary because our US ally and Five Eyes partner is. So wouldn't you want to know what is keeping the strongest military power and your ally up at night? Because they've been taking this topic incredibly seriously with potential national security implications and safety of flight risks. So it was a very interesting exchange. And if you're interested to bring yourself up to speed on what was covered in detail during that hearing in October of last year, as well as all of the news that was, the updates thereafter, what I would encourage you to do, particularly if you're new to this channel, the Unexplained Rundown, have a look at my YouTube channel, and I'll just make sure I'm sharing that with you. Because there are a couple of videos there that may be of value. So I've got a number of videos on there, but the ones that may be of interest, what is Australia doing about UAPs? And then I did an update some months after. So if you're not well versed on this topic in an Australian context, I would certainly encourage you to take a look at those videos. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel and you would like to consider doing that, please feel free. So that kind of brings us to where we are today. So first and foremost, what is a Senate estimates? So essentially, the Senate estimates is, if I just pull up, make sure I've got the right content in front of me here. There we go. So as I mentioned before, the Senate estimates hearings really allow senators to scrutinize how the executive government is spending taxpayer dollars. Senators focus, throughout the course of these hearings, they focus on how the government has spent the money and on the government's future spending plans. So kind of like budget oversight, comparable to budget oversight in the US. Now, it was a pretty jam-packed agenda for this week, and there are a number of portfolios or committees that have time, and I'll just zoom on in so it's a little easier on the eyes there. But essentially, Wednesday of this week was the program that was interest to us. So Wednesday, the 9th of November, in the afternoon, the program under 2.7 had Air Force capabilities scheduled for discussion. And so that's where Senator Whish-Wilson came in and pressed the now new Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, on UAP, building on what the groundwork that he had established in October of 2021. So let me... I'll play for you the exchange of the questioning between Senator Whish-Wilson and Air Marshal Rob Chipman. If you get rid of that one, so you can, if you just want to watch the exchange and then depart, no problem whatsoever. I'm going to play the exchange in its entirety, and then I'll come back to you, and we'll just break it down comprehensively. I'll provide you with my thoughts, perspectives, and analysis, so you can really get a sense as to what the implications are of, one, the questions, and two, the responses that were provided. So here is the exchange in its entirety.
Yeah, Marshal, just before I start my questioning, did you graduate from ADFA in 1989 or start at ADFA in 1989?
Senator Whish-Wilson, Air Marshal Rob Chipman, Chief of Air Force. I started at ADFA in 1989.
Oh, I graduated from there in 1988, so I was interested if you were there while I was there. Yeah. About a year ago, I asked previous Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Hupfield about the release of a US Defence Intelligence report or a preliminary report on UAPs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. And I've just got some follow-up questions for you. There's obviously been a lot happening in this space in the last 12 months, and of course you've taken over the role. Just to fill you in briefly, following the release of that preliminary assessment by the Office Director of National Intelligence, there was a defence legislation amendment in December of 2021 that required the ODNI organisation to report to Congress every year on any updates in relation to UAP. There was a series of congressional hearings in May this year, and then only a few weeks ago, NASA set up their UAP study team or task force. And I was hoping by the time I got to ask you these questions, they may have released their first preliminary assessment to Congress, which was due last week, but we are waiting for that. So with that kind of timeline, that rough timeline used as context, could I just ask you, since you've taken over as Chief of Air Force, in what capacity, if any at all, have you been briefed on the UAP phenomena since you've taken over the role in July?
Senator, I haven't had any specific briefings in relation to UAP since I've taken over.
Okay. Have you followed it on a personal level, just as a matter of interest?
I do not follow it on a personal level.
Okay. At the US congressional hearing on UAP back in May, the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, Scott Bray, confirmed that since the release of this preliminary report in 2021, they had now had 400 case reports they were considering. Most of them were for pilots like yourself. And he was quoted at those hearings as saying the US had brought many allies and international partners into their discussions on UAPs. Given how close we are to the US, has there been any discussions with Australian intelligence services or the Air Force in relation to their approach?
I'm not aware of any formal discussions that we've held with the US.
So you're not aware. Is that means that it just hasn't come across your desk, or?
I imagine it would have come across my desk if those discussions were held in the last 4 months, but I can take on notice and see if there's any other discussions that have been held.
Thank you. Being a pilot yourself, when our military aviators or defence personnel spot something they don't understand or can't identify in our airspace, what encouragement and reporting mechanisms are afforded to the men and women of the ADF in relation to that?
Senator, we have a really strong reporting culture. If there's anything related to safety or airworthiness issues, then we strongly encourage our pilots to report those. There's also mechanisms through standard operational means, our air traffic control, and also our air defence personnel who maintain constant surveillance of our airspace.
So also back at the congressional hearings on UAP in May, the same Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence stated Navy and Air Force crews now have a step-by-step reporting procedure on UAPs on their knee board in the cockpit and in their post-flight debrief procedures. Does that surprise you?
We've seen no reason why we would institute those measures in Australia.
Can you see a reason why would you understand why they are implementing?
No, Senator.
Is there a reason you haven't had a discussion with our chief ally about why they're implementing those procedures? And
I was not aware of those procedures, Senator.
Okay. As Chief of Air Force, would the establishment of a comparable reporting procedure be relatively straightforward to implement in Australia?
I think so. If we saw the need, if there were the issues that we became aware of that affected our safety or security of our operations in our airspace, then yes, it would be a simple matter for us to implement those procedures.
Yeah, and I ask you that in the context of obviously our strong alliance with the US, but the recently executed joint vision statement with the US Air Force. I mean, would you be prepared to make a commitment to establishing comparable reporting procedures, and what process would be required for that to occur?
Senator, perhaps before the Chief of Air Force answers you, Vice Admiral David Johnston, we have routine practices across all of our defence capabilities. If a operationally significant event occurs, including those that they might be able to explain or not, that there's a reporting practice, so not limited to UAPs, but of anything that they would accrue, whether it's on a vessel or an aircraft in the field who might see something, there's an obligation to report those in.
So obviously incursions in defence training ranges by unidentified objects, intrusions by unknown aircraft or objects would represent serious hazards to the safety of flight and potential threats to security of our operations. You've obviously got strategies in place to do that here. Are you aware of reports, I did raise this with the previous Air Marshal as well, of US military exercises being cancelled because of concerns around air safety and observations of UAPs?
Is this a UFO question?
You could call them a UFO if you like, Senator Wong. They're now technically
so just so I'm clear,
unidentified aerial phenomena. What do you think? Do you think it's funny?
I haven't been here for. Well, I don't think I've asked questions about this.
Okay. Well,
I'm not sure we can.
Asking.
Can we assist at all, the Senator, with this line of questioning?
Senator, what I would say is I'm not aware of that. I am aware that there is reports due in the United States. If there is anything in that reporting that raises anything that would be a concern to us in our airspace, then we'll take that seriously.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Well, perhaps the last question for me, and I'll put some other questions on notice. I understand in 1996, the Air Force ceased handling reports on UAPs, determined there was no scientific or compelling reason to continue to devote resources to that investigation. I mean, part of the reason these US structures have been set up is to provide an evidence-based or a data-based, including NASA's involvement in this, a data-based approach to can we eliminate this as a potential threat to national security? Are these foreign flying objects from, or are they from other places? Who knows? On what basis are you aware of is there any documentation around the process that led the Air Force to move away from devoting resources to investigating?
There's no history of that, Senator. What I can say, though, is we have confidence in the reporting mechanisms that the Vice Chief mentioned before, so that if there were any issues that were of concern to us, then they would be reported.
But if there was new data, that would shift your determination to investigate this as a potential issue?
If there are issues raised,
such
Senator,
as the US reports?
If there are issues that we thought were relevant to the safety and security of operations in our airspace, then we'd be seriously concerned about it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
There you have it. So there's the exchange, and quite a lot in there, and we're going to break it on down, and I'll provide you with my thoughts on each question and response that was given. So let's actually kick it off with the first. There we go. I'm just going to pull it back to the right position here. So let's go through each question, and we'll wait for the response from Air Marshal Robert Chipman, and I'll give you some perspective and analysis on, I think, why the question is important and why the answer is important and grossly insufficient. So let's start with the first question that Senator Whish-Wilson had asked.
I'll just ask you, since you've taken over as Chief of Air Force, in what capacity, if any at all, have you been briefed on the UAP phenomena since you've taken over the role in July?
Senator, I haven't had any specific briefings in relation to UAP since I've taken over.
Okay. Have you followed it on a personal level, just as a matter of interest?
I do not follow it on a personal level.
On a
no.
personal level? Okay.
So why the hell is the Chief of Air Force, the new Chief of Air Force, not being briefed on UAP when the former Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Mel Hupfield, was caught completely off guard and thrown under the bus? Wouldn't you think that the Royal Australian Air Force would have learnt its lesson a year later and at least provide the new incoming Chief of Air Force, who command was transferred to him from the 1st of July, wouldn't you at least provide him with some background information at an absolute minimum, or at least some talking points on UAP so he knows how to respond? Now, it's quite possible that senior officials within the Royal Australian Air Force did that, but Air Marshal Rob Chipman has just indicated that he has not received any specific briefing on UAP. And let's get into it. So I actually went after, I submitted a FOIA request earlier, not long ago, actually. It was on, again, I'll zoom in so this is a bit easier on the eyes. So this was a FOIA request that I submitted on the 27th of October of this year, going after emails for Air Marshal Robert Chipman on all of the standard UAP, UFO keywords to see if there had actually been any correspondence or communication between him and members of not just the RAAF but the Australian Defence Force, and in alignment with with, to a degree, there's some congruency there with what the Air Marshal has responded to the Senator's question. We can see while there were no documents were identified as matching the scope of the request. So no emails have been sent to or sent from Air Marshal Robert Chipman pertaining to UAP. That's number one. Number two, we have another Freedom of Information Act document that was that I submitted earlier in the year, and this is again, I'll just pull up the right page here so it's on screen. This is actually, I don't know if I can reposition it, so I might have to bring it at 125. Oh, there we go. No, there we go. I'll just recenter it so it's a bit easier there. All right, so this document is an important one because this is an email dated the Thursday, the 21st of July of this year. So again, keeping in mind that the former Chief of Air Force, Mel Hupfield, was caught completely off guard with the Senator's line of questioning in October of last year. So this is Head of Air Force Capability for your review comment, Senate Estimates topic list. Hi, sir. MLO, Minister Liaison Office have sent through the current Senate estimate briefs list and are seeking your advice on whether the current Chief of Air Force level brief list is accurate or if additions need to be made, topics deleted or multiple topics combined into one brief. SEC, which is the Minister for Defence, and CDF, Chief of Defence Force, brief requirements have been confirmed and are as per the attached list. Your advice will be appreciated for return to Ministerial Liaison Office or Officer by close of business tomorrow. So then the response we have from presumably the Head of Air Force Capability or the individual that holds that position, the HAC, turn the UFO to a no for CAF and we are good to go. So what does that relate to? So let me come up and show you the document in question. So this is, it's heavily redacted because they've redacted anything that is not relevant to the original scope of the request. And this is, this essentially is the Senate Estimates brief list for July of this year. And if we come on down, you can see that hot topics, unidentified aerial phenomena, unidentified flying object. 2 columns, one is no and one is yes. This is actually typically a landscape document, but it's been chopped to a portrait in the documents that were released through Freedom of Information Act. So who is already listed for no? Well, that's the Minister for Defence and the Chief of the Defence Force. CAF, Chief of Air Force, is currently scheduled to receive the Senate estimates brief for July. So is scheduled to receive this information, and you'll see this in just a while. But then you have the head of Air Force capability requesting that the Chief of Air Force not receive the Senate estimates brief. Why the hell would, I mean, that almost is like a deliberate act that the Chief of Air Force be denied access to information that's going to support his responses when put on the hot seat in front of members of Parliament, potentially the media, because of the questions that were asked of then Air Marshal Mel Hupfield last year. And you would think that the Royal Australian Air Force would think that Senator Whish-Wilson is going to be asking more questions about UAP at future Senate estimates. So why on earth would the Chief of Air Force be deprived access to information pertaining to UAP and be able to answer truthfully and comprehensively when asked questions? I just don't understand why he was not given that, he was not afforded that opportunity. And so I'll just show you again that document. So you can see that if I just pull up the correct one, we've got 106, here it is. So this is the document again. And it's clearly obvious that the head of Air Force capability turned the UFO to a no for CAF, and we are good to go. So there is almost clear try and get that word out, is a tough one. Obfuscation, there we go. There is clear obfuscation that this information is being withheld from the Chief of Air Force. What would be the rationale for doing that? Wouldn't you want the Chief of Air Force to be able to answer questions confidently and comprehensively at a Senate estimates? I would think you would. So there's also, you throw that into the mix. Then, well, let's also see who else has not yet been briefed in any capacity on UAP. And this is where we come to our next document. And we'll bring this up so you can see what this looks like. Here it is. So this was a document that I received. This was a ministerial correspondence. Actually, I had reached out to, I had made some inquiries, directed them to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence, Richard Marles, requesting open parliamentary hearings on UAP. And the response that I received from RJ Denny, who is actually the Air Vice Marshal, he's the head of Air Force capability. So he's the one that withheld that Chief of Air Force Senate estimates brief to Robert Chipman. He responded to my inquiries, essentially saying, thank you for your correspondence dated 26th of June of this year. Your correspondence has been passed on to me for response. In response to your first and second question, and I don't obviously have the questions at hand, but I wish to inform you that Defence has not briefed the Deputy Prime Minister with regard to the topic of UAP or UFO. Whilst the Deputy Prime Minister has been engaging with his international counterparts, so he met with the Secretary of Defence in, I believe it was July of this year, that same month, engaging with his international counterparts on a range of topics in his capacity as both Deputy PM and Minister of Defence. This has not included the topic of UFO or UAP. Again, why? Why is the leader of the Australian Defence Force, of the Australian Department of Defence, not being briefed on UAP when clearly our US ally and Five Eyes partner is taking this incredibly seriously? And there is legislation that mandates that the US Department of Defense has to get off its ass and do something about it to try and get to the bottom of the potential national security implications and safety of flight risks. The Deputy Prime Minister has not been provided with the United States Office of Director of National Intelligence preliminary assessment on UAP. So not only has the Chief of Air Force not been provided with any information on UAP to support his efforts to respond confidently and appropriately when pressed by members of Parliament, the media, or Senator Whish-Wilson at a Senate estimates, you also have the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence who has been completely left in the dark. Why? Why are you not being informed about UAP and what is keeping up our ally and the strongest military power on the planet? I simply do not understand the rationale and the thinking behind that. So let's come back to, so that was the first question. Let's now continue on with the second question that was asked by Senator Whish-Wilson.
At the US congressional hearing on UAP back in May, the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, Scott Bray, confirmed that since the release of this preliminary report in 2021, they had now had 400 case reports they were considering. Most of them were for pilots like yourself. And he was quoted at those hearings as saying the US had brought many allies and international partners into their discussions on UAPs. Given how close we are to the US, has there been any discussions with Australian intelligence services or the Air Force in relation to their approach to this?
I'm not aware of any formal discussions that we've held with the US.
So you're not aware. Is that means that it just hasn't come across your desk, or?
I imagine it would have come across my desk if those discussions were held in the last 4 months, but I can take on notice and see if there's any other discussions that have been held.
Thank you.
So why would you be confident that that would come across your desk when the head of Air Force capability is withholding information that you should be privy to with respect to briefing papers on UAP? It's not inconceivable to think that that information is also being withheld from you, and I have a good reason for thinking that. So first and foremost, let's have a look at the theme of that question and the response. So we know that from the National Defence Authorization Act that was signed into law by President Biden on in December of last year. Let me just pull up the page so you've got this in front of you. Here. So many tabs open on my computer here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Again, just zoom on in so it's a bit easier on the eyes. So, 27th of December of last year, President Biden signs into law S1605, the National Defence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022, which we're currently in. The Act authorizes fiscal year appropriations principally for the Department of Defense, for Department of Energy, and so on. So what is included in the National Defence Authorization Act? Let's pull it up. So if we look at, again, let me just pull up the document so we have it on screen. And again, I'll zoom in so it's a bit easier on the eyes for you. There we go. So what's important in the National Defence Authorization Act, what's mandated in that legislation, duties. So the duties of the office established under subsection A shall include the following. Now, the office, we're talking about the office that is to be implemented to investigate UAP. That was AIMSOG originally, and now it is ARO, the All Domain Anomalies Resolutions Office, I believe it is. What's important is number 7. So the duties of the office established under subsection A shall include the following: coordinating with allies and partners of the United States as appropriate to better assess the nature and extent of unidentified aerial phenomena. So it is a requirement of the US Department of Defense to coordinate, reach out to its allies, and engage them on the topic of UAP to try and get to the bottom of it, to understand it. And what we are being told at the public congressional hearing in May of this year is that the US Task Force, or AIMSOG back then, has done exactly that. And I'll show you Scott Bray, who made these comments.
Those were just the initial steps. We also made a concerted effort to assemble subject matter experts from across the Department of Defense and the intelligence community and other U.S. government agencies and departments. We forged partnerships with the research, development, and acquisition communities, with industry partners, and with academic research labs, and we brought many allies and international partners into our discussions on UAP. Additionally,
all right, so he's saying that allies and international partners have been brought into discussions already on UAP. Air Marshal Robert Chipman isn't aware of the Australian Department of Defense, the RAAF or Intel services being contacted by, engaged by the US. Now, thankfully, he's taken that question on notice, so we'll expect to receive a formal response once he has done some digging internally on that to see if any personnel within the Australian Department of Defense or the intelligence services have been in discussions with our US ally on UAP. And I'm not going to rely exclusively on Air Marshal Robert Chipman's response that he is not aware of any engagement or efforts by the US to contact Australian DoD. So only recently, I submitted a US Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA, requesting documentary evidence of, this was my request, documentary evidence of the UAP task force and AIMSOG, the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group, as it was called then. Now it's the ARO office. I'm a private citizen residing in Australia and wish to submit the following FOIA request at the House Intelligence, Counterterrorism, Counterintelligence, and Counter-Proliferation Subcommittee hearing on unidentified aerial phenomena on 17 May 2022. The Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, Scott Bray, publicly stated that, as you just saw in that that clip. And the last sentence there is, we brought many allies and international partners into our discussions on UAP. So I kindly request documentary evidence from the UAP task force and AIMSOG that confirms which allies and international partners of the United States have been brought in discussions on UAP to date. So hopefully we can get some clarity on exactly who the UAP task force and then AIMSOG had been engaging, because again, I don't want to just take it on blind faith that we're going to get all of the answers from, with all due respect, Air Marshal Rob Chipman and the Australian Department of Defense. So I've submitted my Freedom of Information Act request. The one thing that is a bit of a bummer is there are approximately 3,511 open requests ahead of me. So unfortunately, it's going to take a little while before we get a response. However, that said, I have heard it on good authority that the UAP task force has engaged personnel of the Royal Australian Air Force. Now, I don't have any proof of that. I've been informed that in private, and that's why I'm going after the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA request for documentary evidence to verify, well, who has the US engaged to date. So we should receive responses on two fronts. We should receive a response from the Royal Australian Air Force, the question on notice that Air Marshal Rob Chipman has taken, and we should also see documents in the first quarter of next year from the US Department of Defense to see which allies it's engaged with to date. So watch this space, basically. Let's continue on with the next question.
I mean, being a pilot yourself, when our military aviators or defence personnel spot something they don't understand or can't identify in our airspace, what encouragement and reporting mechanisms are afforded to the men and women of the ADF in relation to that?
Senator, we have a really strong reporting culture. If there's anything related to safety or airworthiness issues, then we strongly encourage our pilots to report those. There's also mechanisms through standard operational means, our air traffic control, and also our air defence personnel who maintain constant surveillance of our airspace.
So also back at the...
All right, so what special encouragement is afforded personnel of the Australian Defence Force? Well, let's show one of the more significant documents that was released through the Freedom of Information Act earlier this year. And I've since gone after all versions of this document. It's now famously known as the Chief of Air Force Brief on Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, the most significant document to come out of the Australian Department of Defence in more than 25 years on UAP, because it speaks to earlier iterations of this brief, speak to the strategic narrative, key messages, talking points, background information. So someone at the Australian Department of Defence and the Royal Australian Air Force has read OD&I's preliminary assessment on UAP because it helped inform the production of this document. And what's important in this document, and the highlights were obviously changes that they were proposing: process/protocols to report UAP, UFO in Australian airspace. These are answers to previous questions on notice that Senator Whish-Wilson had submitted. And this is the key one. There is no special encouragement given to pilots to report aircraft, so not just UAP, aircraft they cannot identify, rather to report unusual or unexpected events through Royal Australian Air Force aviation safety reporting procedures. So there is no special encouragement given at the moment. Now, what's interesting is the bullet point before that: any identified aircraft identified by Air Force pilots or personnel entering military-controlled airspace or pose a safety risk to military aircraft are subject to RAAF aviation safety reporting protocols. So what are those reporting protocols? Well, defense safety of flight incidents, including those potentially posed by UAP, so including those potentially posed by UAP, are handled by the Defence Aviation Safety Authority, DASA, with civilian safety of flight incidents the purview of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, CASA. So what is the reporting mechanisms are in place courtesy of the Defence Aviation Safety Authority? So I give you the, here it is, the Defence Aviation Safety Regulation, form number 44, which is called and occurrence report. Again, let me zoom in so it's a bit easier on the eyes. Occurrence report is only required to report accidents, serious incidents like near misses, collisions. Voluntary reporting is an option, but there is no special encouragement afforded to military aviators and personnel of the Australian Defence Force to report a UAP if it's observed. Now, what I find very puzzling is that a UAP may not be an immediate threat in terms of a near miss. However, if a UAP is observed at distance or close proximity, it could become a safety of flight risk as a potential near miss or a collision. So the fact that you have no sensible see something, say something reporting mechanisms currently available to military aviators and pilots, and there's no special encouragement afforded to them, how many reports are there that are going unreported? How many pilots are observing UAP and are concerned about it, but aren't reporting it? One, because they're not encouraged to. Two, there's no reporting mechanism in place for anything other than a serious incident, a near miss, a collision, or an accident. And three, the stigma and ridicule has long plagued this topic. So why would anyone want to come forward and voluntarily report an observation of a UAP? The Australian Department of Defence has said in responses to Senator Whish-Wilson's subsequent questions on notice that there have been no reports of unidentified aircraft in the last 20 years. Well, that makes sense because there's no reporting mechanisms available to military aviators, pilots, and personnel, and they're not encouraged to do so. So how many incidents of UAP being observed in restricted and Australian airspace are going on and not being reported, are just flying under the radar? And the Australian Department of Defence and Royal Australian Air Force argues that there's no compelling or other scientific reason to devote resources to the resources to the ongoing investigation of UAP. Well, how would you know? You're not even looking. You're not even putting some protocols and procedures in place that would allow you to capture compelling data. So that's the Defence Aviation Safety Authority through their DASR Form 44. I also took it upon myself to see what if there has been any documentation, any emails pertaining to UAP that have crossed the email inboxes of any staff at CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. And this is the Freedom of Information Act submission that I made and the response that I received on the 27th of October. I requested a copy of all emails and supporting file attachments sent to, from or CC'd to all CASA staff for the period 27 October of last year. So that was the last year's Senate's estimates to the 5th of October this year, the date that I submitted the request. All of the standard keywords that conform to UAP. And essentially the decision from the decision maker, I refuse your request. I am satisfied the documents you are seeking do not exist. So there is no documentation at all across any of the email inboxes of CASA staff pertaining to UAP. And that potentially makes sense because there are currently no reporting mechanisms in place for commercial and general aviation pilots to report observations of UAP. I also took it upon myself to engage Air Services Australia. And who is Air Services Australia? So Air Services Australia, if I just pull up their site so you can see this on your end. There we go. I'll just pull this up here. Make sure I've got the right information on screen. I'll just come to the homepage, probably a little bit easier. We provide safe, secure, efficient, and environmentally responsible services to the aviation industry and community. They provide aviation services. So essentially, they're a government-owned organization that's responsible for the safety of approximately 11% of the world's airspace. They're responsible for the safe and efficient management of Australia's skies through the provision of air traffic management services, aviation rescue firefighting services, aeronautical information, aviation communications, and radio navigation aids. So I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to Air Services Australia along the same lines of the CASA request. And again, I'll pull this up on screen for you. Going after all emails and supporting file attachments sent to, from, or CC'd Air Services Australia staff from the 1st of April of this year to the 6th of October. I'd actually gone for a 12-month date range, but they had knocked me back. So I thought, well, maybe they'll compromise if I reduce it to 6 months. So I went for a 6-month search with all of the standard keywords, and Air Services Australia wanted to foot me the bill, charge me $120 for documents that I have, information that I have a right to. So I requested a waiver of those charges. That waiver request was denied. And what was interesting, though, was that prior to submitting my request, I made some inquiries with Air Services Australia pertaining to current policies and guidance. So this is what essentially asked the question, what current policies and guidance does Air Services Australia provide its personnel on responding to encounters of UAP, historically referred to as UFOs? Air Services advised that they did not have any protocols, policies, or guidance in place. They continue not to, but that the Department of Defence or CASA may hold relevant documentation. Well, they don't. Both of them don't, because they don't have any policies or protocols in place. The Australian Department of Defence hasn't had any protocols in place to record and report on UAP since 1996. There were quite a number of documents that were discovered during this request. However, and to the accredited decision makers' credit on this request, had afforded me the courtesy of actually giving me an explanation, a summary of what the documents entailed. Essentially, all of the emails that Air Services Australia staff are sending back and forth that match keyword searches pertaining to UAP are all, they're sharing UFO videos on YouTube, articles, informal discussions about sightings of UFOs, report that the Australian UFO Research Network's telephone number was not working, Twitter information, and obviously marketing emails with links on some of the articles that have come out of the US and homegrown locally. So it really wasn't, and their response, the document, basically their reasoning was, well, the documents that you're seeking are really not going to be of significant public interest or public benefit as they pertain to your policies and guidance currently, or potentially in future, that could be implemented by Air Service Australia. So the documents that were discovered were basically not worth pursuing for $120. I could have gone after those documents, but I'd prefer to save that money on maybe spend it on another FOIA request that might be yield a little bit more fruit. So let's now move on to the next question that Senator Whish-Wilson had posed to Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Rob Chipman.
The congressional hearings on UAP in May, the same Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence stated Navy and Air Force crews now have a step-by-step reporting procedure on UAPs on their kneeboard in the cockpit and in their post-flight debrief procedures. Does that surprise you?
We've seen no reason why we would institute those measures in Australia.
Can you see a reason why would you understand why they are implementing?
No, Senator.
But is there a reason you haven't had a discussion with our chief ally about why they're implementing those procedures? And
I was not aware of those procedures, Senator.
Okay. As Chief of Air Force, would the establishment of a comparable reporting procedure be relatively straightforward to implement in Australia?
I think so. If we saw the need, if there were the issues that we became aware of that affected our safety or security of our operations in our airspace, then yes, it would be a simple matter for us to implement those procedures.
Yeah, and I ask you that in the context of obviously our strong alliance with the US, but the recently executed joint vision statement with the US Air Force.
All right, so let's break that down. So let's have a look at what do we know. So we know that from the 25th of June of last year, ODNI's preliminary assessment on UAP, that the Navy had been trialling, if I just pull up, I think it's on this page. So available reporting largely inconclusive. So no standardized reporting mechanism existed until the Navy established one in March 2019. The Air Force subsequently adopted that mechanism in November 2020, but it remains limited to US government reporting. So they've obviously now formalized those protocols and reporting mechanisms via that kneeboard reporting that's available to aviators and pilots. Now, the joint vision statement that Senator Whish-Wilson is referencing there is, I'll just pull this up so you can see it on screen. So not long ago, Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Robert Chipman sat down with the Air Force Chief of Staff General C.Q. Brown Jr. To execute a joint vision statement. Now, what is the purpose of a joint vision statement? And again, I'll just zoom on in so you can see this on screen. So the joint vision statement builds on the US and Australian strategic partnership and conveys the two countries' intent to work together to direct and support the development and operations of their air forces. In today's evolving competitive environment, the US and Australia must be ready to meet any challenges that come up and to do so with friends and international partners around the world. Well, it sounds to me like that would be a perfect opportunity in the joint vision statement, or what you have discussed to inform finalization of joint vision statement, to employ similar strategies, protocols, and procedures in place that are potentially going to help mitigate safety of flight risks in the future and provide sensible see-something reporting mechanisms for aviators and pilots so that they have specific encouragement and it's mandatory for them to report UAP if they observe it. why is Australia not adopting this same approach when you've just invested all of this time, energy, and effort to sign off on a joint vision statement? The objective in the joint vision statement is to generate air power that supports mutual national security approaches to deter aggression and confront threats. UAP can be a threat, hostile or not, to a free, stable, and open international system. This will be accomplished through regional engagement, effective information sharing, shared approaches to security challenges, and credible, sustainable, and interoperable air forces across the Indo-Pacific region. So it sounds like there is, and this was an important one. Supporting this collaboration is the Air Senior National Representative, or ASNR Forum, established in 2000 and co-chaired by the US Air Force's Vice Chief of Staff and Australia's Deputy Chief of Air Force. The ASNR Forum manages an open, agile, and frank dialogue between the two air forces to support collaboration on an effective mix of warfighting capabilities and contexts. The quote being, ASNR works because our countries share a mutual understanding of the challenges we face in the air domain and the need to address them. That's absolute bullshit as it pertains to UAP. There is no mutual understanding of the challenges we face in the air domain. UAP pose a challenge in the air domain of US airspace, and it poses a challenge in the air domains of other airspaces around the world, because UAP is not an issue that's isolated to the United States. And the fact that there hasn't been any observations of UAP in and above Australian military airspace, restricted airspace, or civilian airspace is because there's no sensible see-something reporting mechanisms in place. If you don't have special encouragement and reporting mechanisms afforded to aviators and pilots, then you're not going to get any data. You're not going to get any compelling data if you're not prepared to look outside your front door. The whole Fermi paradox. Oh, well, there's no alien life out there because we haven't seen it. Well, you're not going to find anything if you're not looking, right? So how can you expect to get compelling data on UAP when you are not currently affording those that are out there on the front lines being exposed to these things and safety of flight risks? You're not giving them an opportunity to report what they see and feel free of stigma and ridicule when they report it. Now, the next question is a good one that I believe Senator Whish-Wilson had asked.
I mean, would you be prepared to make a commitment to establishing comparable reporting procedures, and what process would be required for that to occur?
Senator, perhaps before the Chief of Air Force answers you, Vice Admiral David Johnston, we have routine practices across all of our defence capabilities. If a operationally significant event occurs, including those that they might be able to explain or not, that there's a reporting practice, so not limited to UAPs, but of anything that they would accrue, whether it's on a vessel or an aircraft in the field who might see something, that there's an obligation to report those in.
So obviously incursions in defence training range.
Operationally significant. What I'd be interested to learn what that means, because the reporting mechanisms that the Royal Australian Navy currently have in place as they pertain to UAP. If I pull up this document, this is another Freedom of Information Act document that I was able to secure. This is from the 4th of November of last year, following the questions that Senator Whish-Wilson posed to then Air Marshal Mel Hupfield on the 27th of October. Navy's responses to the 2 dot points. Does Navy have any current protocols for the reporting of UFOs, UAP? Navy does not have any specific process or protocols for reporting UFO, UAP, other than to report unusual air traffic to the appropriate airspace control authorities. Historically, has Navy had any protocol for the reporting of UFOs, UAPs? Historically, Navy has not had any specific protocol for reporting UFO, UAP, other than to report unusual air traffic to appropriate airspace control authorities. So, well, what constitutes unusual air traffic? Because we know that Air Services Australia currently don't have any policies in place, nor have they received any guidance on reporting or procedures on capturing data on UAP. So, what happens if a military aviator or a commercial pilot or a general aviation pilot see something they can't identify, and they do get on the horn to air traffic control to see, are you guys painting anything? You ping anything at the moment? No, we're not seeing anything. What are you seeing? Well, what are they going to do? They're not going to report a UAP, because what's going to happen to that report? It's not going to go anywhere. Not only does, if military aviators and pilots come out off of their training exercise or their mission, and they have observed something, what are they going to do with it? They're not going to report it because there's no reporting mechanisms in place. If they do get on the horn to air traffic control and they say something, well, what's air traffic control going to do about it? Nothing, because there's no reporting mechanisms in place for UAP. Now, if it's unusual air traffic, I would be interested to get some clarification from the Navy as to what they consider to be unusual air traffic, or what is they consider to be operationally significant, because UAP could become operationally significant. Again, what if a UAP, using the example of the USS Russell in the US, we know our friend Jeremy Corbell released those videos of the green pyramid-shaped UAP. Well, those were allowed to fly with impunity over the USS Russell without the Navy doing a single thing about it. They didn't bring them, they obviously didn't bring them down with artillery or directed energy weapons to identify the source. So that's potentially a huge embarrassment for the US Navy and the US Department of Defense if these are true unknowns, UAP, or if they're Chinese drones flying with impunity above military carriers and warships. Well, then that's a huge intelligence failure that is, I believe, more significant than that of if it was a UAP. I mean, if our foreign adversaries are flying around and checking out what Navy and military are doing just to test their response, to test their vulnerabilities and capabilities, well, that does present a huge vulnerability for the U.S. Department of Defense. So if a UAP has the potential to become an operationally significant issue, whether it be a concern of a near miss, potential collision, safety of flight, what are the reporting mechanisms? Are they comparable with the Defense Aviation Safety Authority, the Form 44? Just fill out an occurrence report and you're good to go. There are no reporting mechanisms in place at the moment that are going to motivate military aviators, pilots, and personnel of the Australian Defence Force to report, volunteer their report, because they're not the stigma and ridicule that's long associated with this topic. And two, what's the point? If I report it, it's not going to get followed up. Nothing's going to come of it. So I'm wasting my time if I spend 30 minutes writing down my account of what I observed, when nothing's going to happen in that report. It's just going to get shelved. So this is why the Australian Department of Defence needs to implement comparable measures to mitigate the potential risks inherent with UAP. Safety of flight risks, safety of assets, safety of personnel. And I don't know why they've buried their head in the sand on this topic for that long. And what I'm frustrated with is that the Vice Admiral felt like he had to step in to save the Air Marshal Robert Chipman from answering that question. Again, maybe because Robert Chipman hadn't been briefed on UAP and was going to be in a foot and mouth situation, not knowing potentially how to respond to that question. Would you be prepared to offer a commitment to establishing comparable procedures? The Royal Australian Navy Vice Admiral steps in and answers for him. So I would love to see a follow-up question on notice submitted pertaining to that. Would RAAF and Australian Department of Defence be prepared to make a commitment to implementing, installing some protocols and procedures that would make it easy for folks to say something when they see something? All right, we're coming to the back end here, folks. So this is where it really gets quite fiery.
Unidentified objects, intrusions by unknown aircraft or objects would represent serious hazards to the safety of flight and potential threats to security of our operations. You've obviously got strategies in place to do that here. Are you aware of reports? I did raise this with the previous Air Marshal as well, of US military exercises being cancelled because of concerns around air safety and observations of UAPs.
Is this a UFO question?
You could call them a UFO if you like, Senator Wong. They're now technically
just so I'm clear,
unidentified aerial phenomena. What do you think? Do you think it's funny?
I haven't been here for. I don't think I've asked questions about this.
Okay. Well,
I'm not sure we can.
Asking.
Can we assist at all, the Senator, with this line of questioning?
Senator, what I would say is I'm not aware of that. I am aware that there is reports due in the United States. If there is anything in that reporting that raises anything that would be a concern to us in our airspace, then we'll take that seriously.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that.
Absolutely disgraceful. While I've supported the policies and initiatives of Senator Penny Wong for quite some time, she is the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Her ignorance and mocking tone in response to Senator Whish-Wilson's question is, in my opinion, utterly disgraceful. She should be ashamed of herself. She has disrespected the senator. She has disrespected members of US Congress that have taken this topic incredibly seriously, having seen some very alarming classified information and data behind closed doors. She has disrespected members of the US and the Australian military, particularly those in the US that have come forward and reported something when they've seen something, and they've been subjected to ridicule, reprisals, stigma. They've been ostracized. They've maybe missed out on a promotion because they've come forward, and they've been the laughing stock of their peers. Senator Wong, you have disrespected experiences who have seen something or experienced something that they cannot fully fathom and understand. And you have disrespected anyone, including like myself, that takes this topic incredibly seriously and is gravely concerned with the gaps in Australian defence security that UAP pose. Now, I'm not saying that UAP are extraterrestrial, little green men, which is clearly where you went in your headspace on your response. UAP could be a smorgasbord of things. It could be extraterrestrial. It could be foreign adversarial technology. It could be misidentification. It could be airborne clutter. It could be atmospheric phenomena. It could be interdimensional elements or beings. It could be ultra-terrestrial beings, some breakaway civilization technology that has evaded human detection for who knows how many years or millennia. It could be future human. There are a number of possibilities that UAP could be. And just like when the media always kick off their report on the latest news on UAP with the bloody X-Files theme, your approach is what we have seen time and time again. Stigma and ridicule has long plagued this topic and has not furthered the conversation on this topic whatsoever. So shame on you, Senator Wong, for contributing to the stigma and ridicule that has long plagued this topic. I would strongly suggest that you take some time to educate yourself on the UAP topic, because there are a number of resources that at an absolute minimum you could review that will bring you up to speed. And one of them is the ODNI's preliminary assessment on UAP as an absolute starting point. You could also familiarize yourself with what is keeping our US ally up at night by reviewing the public congressional hearing on UAP from May of this year. At an absolute bare minimum, if you just watch those, if you read that report and watch that public congressional hearing, I suspect your response to a question that is a valid and appropriate question for a senator, an Australian senator, to ask with respect to defence vulnerabilities and capabilities and the safety of its personnel, I would encourage you to educate yourself before you make ridiculous and disrespectful comments that serve this topic and members of the Australian Air Force, serve them not one iota. Your comments frankly do a disservice to members of the Australian Department of Defence and all of the good folks that put their lives on the line day in, day out to defend this country, and you're not even prepared to entertain the notion that there is something in the skies that our US ally and Five Eyes partner can't identify, and they're putting measures in place to better understand the extent and nature of UAP, as well as mitigate the risks that UAP pose its aviators, pilots, personnel, as well as national security implications. Please do some homework on this topic before you step into the arena and make such a stupid comment. I'm not going to go any further there, because I'm just going to continue to get fired up. And sadly, Senator Wong, you are not alone in your frame of thinking on how you ridicule and minimize this topic, because unfortunately, ridicule and stigma is rampant throughout the Australian Department of Defence and the Royal Australian Air Force. And I'll give you an example. Another Freedom of Information Act request that I submitted, and a document that came back. Let me pull up this document so we can go through this. Just going to find it. Here we go. Just need to make sure I've got the right one here. It is there. No, we'll go for this one. Okay. Sorry, folks. Just taking me a little while to find this document. Here it is. All right. So this was an email that was secured through the Freedom of Information Act. An email from on the Thursday, the 19th of May, and I believe this was an email that was sent from an iPad, wondering if there's some cybersecurity risks associated with sending information and responding to a topic that is obviously sensitive, with our US ally and Five Eyes partner investing so much time, energy, and effort. The email was pertaining to an article, ABC News. It was just after the public congressional hearing. ABC News, US Congress holds first hearing on UFOs in decades. This is the commentary from the sender. Wait for it, wait for it. US Congress holds first hearing on UFOs in decades. The US Congress has held its first hearing in half a century on UFOs, and no, there is still no government confirmation of extraterrestrial life. That's obviously taken directly from the article. This is free-form commentary from the sender of this email. What's the response to this email? Sir, all jokes aside, I think this might end up causing us some work. This article calls out AUKUS, Australia, United Kingdom, US, directly regarding a more collaborative approach to this, the UFO topic. That was, an earlier email. So just so I've got the emails, this is, a separate email. So it's 19th of May, just so I can highlight how it is not being taken seriously whatsoever in the halls of the Royal Australian Air Force. This was a separate email on the 13th of May. All jokes aside, the response, you're right, it may trigger more UFO flavored interest. The truth is out there. I just need to determine if interest in this sci-fi, this science fiction, is ahead of Air Force capability or CD, SPC, I imagine that Space Command lead. So there is stigma, and ridicule is still obviously alive and well, and taking the piss out of this topic is still frequent within the Australian Department of Defence, which is a real shame to see that there are no doubt many men and women within the Australian Department of Defence that do a bloody good job, and they put their lives on the line every day. And those comments taking the piss out of this topic is a slap in the face to those that are putting themselves on the front line, like aviators and pilots who are potentially at risk of a near miss or a collision or observing a UAP and then not knowing what the hell to do about it because they're not encouraged to report. There's no mechanisms to report, and they're going to be made fun of, clearly, based on the emails that you've just seen. So, Senator Wong, consider yourself in good company. There are folks within the Australian Department of Defence that are taking the mickey out of this topic and clearly share the same humour that you do around it. So best of luck and success to you going forward and how the general public respond to your disrespectful comments. And I hope that you do yourself a favour and educate yourself on this topic so that when a follow-up question is asked by Senator Whish-Wilson or hopefully another senator or member of parliament, you can at least make a better informed decision that's in the interest of the Australian Department of Defence and the members, the men and women of the Australian Defence Force. The final question that was asked.
Question for me, and I'll put some other questions on notice. I understand in 1996, the Air Force ceased handling reports on UAPs, determined there was no scientific or compelling reason to continue to devote resources to that investigation. I mean, part of the reason these US structures have been set up is to provide an evidence-based or a data-based, including NASA's involvement in this, a data-based approach to can we eliminate this as a potential threat to national security? Are these foreign flying objects from, or are they from other places? Who knows? On what basis are you aware of is there any documentation around the process that led the Air Force to move away from devoting resources to investigating?
There's no history of that, Senator. What I can say, though, is we have confidence in the reporting mechanisms that the Vice Chief mentioned before, so that if there were any issues that were of concern to us, then they would be reported.
But if there was new data, that would shift your determination to investigate this as a potential issue?
If there are issues raised,
such
Senator,
as the US reports?
If there are issues that we thought were relevant to the safety and security of operations in our airspace, then we'd be seriously concerned about it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
There you have it. So two things. One, I have since submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for documentary evidence that informed the cessation of the Royal Australian Air Force's investigation into the UAP UFO topic in 1996. That was off the back of policy recommendation that was made some years prior. So in 1993, I believe it was, the then Chief of Air Staff, or Chief of Air Force, they call it Chief of Air Staff back then, received a briefing paper on recommendations on changes it should make to its unusual aerial sightings policy. It was referred to as unusual aerial sightings back then, UAS, colloquially UFO, and now obviously UAP. So what was the policy recommendation that was made? If I just pull up the applicable section, this was the policy recommendation, suggested policy. To account for many years, the RAAF has been formally responsible for handling unusual aerial sightings, UAS at the official level. Consideration of the scientific record suggests that whilst not all UAS have a ready explanation, there is no compelling reason for the RAAF to continue to devote resources to recording, investigating, and attempting to explain UAS. The RAAF no longer accepts reports on UAS and no longer attempts assignment of cause or allocation of reliability. Members of the community who seek to report a UAS to the RAAF personnel will be referred to as civil UFO research organization like MUFON in the first instance. Known organizations are listed in the annex. So my comment here is, well, if not all UAS have a ready explanation, one, back then in 1993, what's that, about 30 years ago, wouldn't the fact that not all UAS have a ready explanation, isn't that enough of a compelling reason to continue to devote resources to its investigation? Apparently, and this is through good research that Keith Basterfield has done over the years, approximately 3% of the UAS UFO reports that the RAAF investigated, it could explain 3% of them. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't give a flying stuff about the 97% of UFO reports that can be explained or attributed to prosaic explanations. I want to know what those 3% are. Or even if it's 1%, I want to know what 1% of these unknowns are, because it only takes one foreign adversary to fly with impunity in our airspace, and God forbid we find ourselves in a conflict with Russia or China, and they have first strike capability, game over. And then you've got, nukes being dropped everywhere, right? I don't want, I want the Australian Department of Defence to be as strong as it possibly can be, and it needs to be in order to support our US ally and Five Eyes partner US, and it should therefore employ comparable measures that will achieve, success and air dominance and the defense of our nation. So this was the policy recommendation that was made in 1993, and I'll show you in October of 1993. It was signed off, and then in 1996, it was implemented. So RAAF ceased taking reports of UFOs because it could not find any compelling or scientific reason going forward to devote resources. So number one, I have gone after additional documentary evidence that supports that statement. Well, what other information informed that policy? What was the other information that helped inform the drafting of that policy? What went into that policy recommendation? And the second part of Air Marshal Robert Chipman's response, well, I was actually quite reassured that he would take seriously any findings that come out of the ODNI's updated report. If there are any findings that are of concern to the Royal Australian Air Force and Australian Department of Defence, and has an implication for the security of our airspace, that they will take that very seriously. And they will seriously assess and take on board any new compelling data that comes their way. Now, what are the chances of new compelling data coming their way? I don't see that happening because there is currently no special encouragement afforded to members of the Australian Defence Force. There's no sensible see something, say something reporting mechanisms in place. And clearly, based on Senator Wong's disrespectful outburst and the jokes being made in emails throughout the halls of the Royal Australian Air Force, that I don't think you're going to get a lot of folks volunteering reports going forward. There's what motivation and impetus is there for them to actually say something if they see something. There's nothing at the moment. So I would then implore to those of you that are watching this, if you are a member, current or former, of the Australian Defence Force, the Royal Australian Air Force, the Royal Australian Navy, the Army, or the Space Command, if you have observed UAP in the line of duty since 1996, please consider coming forward and sharing your story and sharing your account. You can do it publicly, or if you prefer to do it anonymously. There are a number of good folks out there that will be happy to take your account and treat you as a source. You will be a source that will not have your information revealed. The likes of Ross Coulthart, Keith Basterfield, Bill Chalker, Jeremy Corbell, Ben Hansen, myself. If you feel comfortable to come forward and share your story, the more information that we can get from members of the Australian Defence Force that have seen something, that now feel compelled to say something in an effort to help move the needle on the Australian Department of Defence's position on the UAP topic. We need to get folks like you in front of people in positions of leadership in defence, or in front of those people that I just mentioned, so that they can take your account and we can research it, we can investigate it, we can FOIA it, we can try and get as much data as possible pertaining to what you have seen or what you have experienced, so we can provide that compelling data to defence leadership so they can revisit their position on this topic. Because unfortunately, my fear is that the Australian Department of Defence and Royal Australian Air Force is going to keep towing the line, is going to keep doing what it's been doing since 1996, which is absolutely fuck all. They're not going to do anything. Excuse my French. They're not going to do anything. They're going to sit on their hands unless their hands are forced. So please do consider coming forward and sharing your account if you have observed UAP in the line of active duty since 1996. Because before 1996, the Royal Australian Air Force investigated UFOs. They stopped doing that in 1996. So not only have they not investigated UAP since that time, they haven't even formally briefed the Chief of Air Force on UAP. The Minister for Defence and Deputy Prime Minister has not been briefed on UAP. And the classified data housed within the classified version of ODNI's preliminary assessment has not been reviewed by the Australian Department of Defence, as best I can tell. Now, again, we're chasing documents through FOIA to see who the UAP task force and AIMSOG has, which allies it has engaged. Again, I've heard it on good authority that the UAP task force has engaged in discussion with members of the Royal Australian Air Force. So hopefully that request will yield some fruit. It may not, but we have to do our due diligence and try and find out the truth, because I'm not going to rely solely on government to tell me everything that it knows or that is fact. I don't think it is going to always reveal what it's only going to reveal the absolute bare minimum, what it has to. If the Australian taxpaying public doesn't have a need to know on some information, then we're not going to know, because they're not going to share it. So that is my plea to you, members of the Australian Defence Force, past and present. Please consider coming forward and sharing your story and your account. Know that we will treat you as a sacred source. Your information, your identity will not be revealed unless you would like it to be. So please do consider that. I will say in closing, a lot of the questions that, actually the vast majority of the questions that Senator Whish-Wilson had posed during the Senate estimates to Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Robert Chipman, they were very thoughtful questions. Because if I just zoom on in, my colleagues and I put a lot of thought into crafting them. And I don't say this to impress you, but to impress upon you. Yes, I and several of my colleagues drafted the questions that Senator Whish-Wilson posed during the Senate estimates. This is an email supporting that. I had sent an email to Jack Davenport, who is a staffer for Senator Whish-Wilson, and I had provided him with 30 questions pertaining to UAP that the senator could consider to help his lines of inquiry at the Senate estimates. And just so you know, there was plenty more questions that could have been asked by Senator Whish-Wilson. He sadly only had a very short time allocated. I think his questioning was, just over 8 minutes. But I had prepared, along with my colleagues, 30 questions. We put a lot of time, energy, and effort to crafting these questions so that Senator Whish-Wilson would be armed with all of the information that he needed and had at his disposal to, really press the Air Marshal Robert Chipman on this topic. So again, I don't say that to impress you, but to impress upon you that you, as a member of the public, as an Australian taxpayer, your engagement with your elected representatives can make a difference, because it was only a year ago that I started considering engaging my elected representatives on this topic. And there was an event that took place in September of last year called the Big Phone Home 2 back then. And it was the Big Phone Home 3. Its third iteration was undertaken in August of this year, and that was an all-day. The Big Phone Home 2 in September of last year was a 3-day live stream event. In August of this year, it was a 1-day, an all-day live stream citizen activism event, and I had the good fortune of being involved in the Big Phone Home 3 to try and encourage everyday folks like you, like me, to get off their ass and get in the game and ask their elected representatives to take this topic seriously, because Senator Whish-Wilson cannot do this alone. He needs more of his fellow senators and members of parliament asking these questions. And if you are not sure how to engage your elected representative on this topic, I would encourage you to visit the Big Phone Home 3 website. The link is in the description below. And just from the homepage, you can watch the recorded live stream event if you wish, but you can quickly and easily copy and paste an email to your elected representatives. I had the good fortune of being asked to draft an email template. So you can copy and paste this email template and just fire it off to your member of parliament or your senator. And I am living proof that consistent persistence in engaging your representatives can make a difference, because Senator Whish-Wilson and his staffers do not have the time that maybe we do to, jump into this topic and dot the I's and cross the T's. So I feel very privileged that I was afforded the opportunity to put together a thoughtful list of questions with my colleagues that the senator could ask and that would inform his lines of inquiry. And you can do exactly the same of your senator if you just engage them. So please, if you are interested in advocating for this topic and you want to activate yourself and have your elected representative best serve your interests, if this is an interest of yours that you're passionate about and it's important to you, I would encourage you to engage your elected representatives. And don't just take my word for it, because there is a fellow Australian of mine. His name is Glenn Sampson. And I'm just going to pull up an example of his correspondence. So he had reached out to his elected representative, Katie Gallagher of the ACT, and requested that she ask questions of defence leadership on this topic. And I'm just going to find the email for you. Where is it? I've got it somewhere towards the bottom. Here we go. There it is. So Glenn Sampson had seen the email template that I had crafted for the Big Phone Home 3 event in August of this year. And his correspondence to Katie Gallagher, Senator in the ACT, was then escalated to Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence. And Katie Gallagher requested that Richard Marles respond to Glenn's inquiry as it pertained to UAP in an Australian context. And Glenn received a response from Richard Marles. Now, while the content of the response is pretty stock standard, this is the most significant piece of ministerial correspondence that a member of the public, that an Australian taxpayer has received from a sitting Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence to date. So this and the example that I gave you in me working with my colleagues to collaborate and come up with a number of questions that the Senator could use to inform his lines of inquiry and questioning, you have the ability to inform to educate and inform the mindset and lines of possible inquiry that your elected representative may choose to take on this topic. If we have more senators like Senator Whish-Wilson asking these sorts of questions in Parliament, if more noise is created on this topic, I suspect we will see the Australian Department of Defence review its position on UAP much faster than it will take if we don't. And there is a formal defence strategic review that's taking place at the moment, with the outcomes of that to be, I believe, reported on in March of next year. So, whilst there have been some submissions made to the Defence Strategic Review on UAP, that's not enough. You have the power to shape the thinking of your elected representatives if you only engage them. And I implore you to do this because it is important on a number of levels. Most importantly, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests will only go so far. Requests can be rejected if they are considered to be too complicated and burdensome on the place too much of an administrative burden on the FOIA team. They can take a long time to receive a response. We do have some problems with FOIA in Australia at the moment. The statutory deadline for response is currently 30 days. So at the moment, It's generally pretty good, but I'm seeing a lot more of my request now be extended out for the FOIA teams asking me for an extension request because they don't have the capacity to address a lot of the FOIA requests that are being made. So FOIA is a valuable tool, and this is where I really admire and respect the work of John Greenwald Jr. and what he has done with FOIA over the last couple of decades, and I feel privileged that I've been in a position to learn from him. But FOIA is not enough. It's a valuable piece of the puzzle, but it's not enough. If you engage your elected representatives on this topic and they take your queries seriously, like Senator Whish-Wilson has, like Katie Gallagher has, and I suspect there are a few others out there, they then have the power to ask defense leadership to demand answers from defense leadership. And I've given you some examples of that. So if it goes through an elected representative like a senator or a member of parliament, then everything then gets escalated up the food chain. It goes to the top of the list. Because FOIA, we're really just looking for the scraps, and we're trying to get breadcrumbs that will lead to other breadcrumbs of another larger bread loaf. So I would certainly encourage you that if you do have an appetite to seek, if you really want greater transparency from your government and accountability from your government on the UAP topic, if you're an Australian citizen or Australian taxpayer, please do consider engaging your elected representatives on this topic. And you've got the tools at your disposal, the Big Phone Home 3, copy and paste the email. And if you just Google search contact my elected representative, you'll find quickly and easily find how you can contact them electronically via email. You can tweet them, you can call them, you can send them snail mail. If you wish to reach out to me, please feel free to engage me on Twitter. And I will be more than happy to assist you where I can with really all that I have learned to date, which is still not much. I'm just one guy playing my part, doing what is important to me to try and advance the conversation and elevate the conversation on this topic. So if you want to get off your ass and get in the game like I did, because I was watching from the sidelines and just hoping that someone will do it. John Greenwald will do it. This will all blow over, and we'll get the answers that we need if someone else does it. Well, if you want something done, do it yourself. Get off your ass, get in the game, activate yourself, take action, and engage your elected representatives on this topic. That is my hope, and that is my wish for you, and I encourage you to do it if it's important to you. So on that note, I do appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. It's gone a lot longer than I anticipated. Hopefully the perspectives and analysis that I've provided you with has been helpful, particularly if you are new to this topic or if you're well versed. If you have found the topic and the subject matter of this video of interest, please consider giving it a like, share, subscribe. Share it with your colleagues, your friends, your family, if you think that they would benefit from a review. And if you're not on YouTube, if you're a fan of podcasts and you like to listen on the go, excited to let you know that the Unexplained Rundown is now on Spotify. So just search for us on Spotify, the Unexplained Rundown, and you will be able to listen to this episode along with other episodes that I've done as well. So do feel free to check that out if the content is of interest. So on that note, again, I will say farewell. I do appreciate all of the time that you've given me today, and look forward to seeing you on a future episode of the Unexplained Rundown. Thanks again.